Hey students, what's up? Pastor Chase here. Thank you so much for joining me on this 3 quick devotion series on the Holy Spirit. And the big idea for this devotion is this, that the Holy Spirit is in the Old Testament. Like God and like Jesus, the Holy Spirit always has been present, even in the Old Testament. Just a couple examples, students, for you guys to check this out. Genesis 1-2, right in the very beginning of the Bible, hovering over the waters of the first day of creation. Genesis 1:26, let us make man in our own image. We also see examples of the Holy Spirit in Exodus 31, verse 3, Exodus 35, verse 31, Deuteronomy 34, verse 9, Judges 14, verse 6, 1 Samuel 16, verse 13, and Psalm 51, 11. Just a few examples here, and every single one of these passages shows us the Holy Spirit empowering people for service to God and leadership and prophecy. And it's kind of somewhat limited, almost giving us, the readers or the listeners, a sneak peek as to what is to come, kind of like a movie trailer. And I'm going to use this metaphor, this example, throughout this series. The Old Testament, the Holy Spirit work in the Old Testament is kind of like a movie trailer we see before it's actually released. We just get a sneak peek of how great it's going to be, maybe just like the best things that it can do. And in the Old Testament, the Holy Spirit is kind of like that, kind of like a movie trailer, a sneak peek of what is to come. Moses put it this way in Numbers 11, 16, 17. I'm going to jump around here, 25, 26, 29. This is one example of the Holy Spirit in the Old Testament. I want to read it right here. The Lord said to Moses, bring me 70 of Israel's elders who are known to you as leaders and officials among the people. Have them come to the tent of meeting that they may stand there with you. I will come down and speak with you there, and I will take some of the power of the Spirit that is on you, Moses, and put it on them. They will share the burden of the people with you so that you will not have to carry it alone. 25. Then the Lord came down in the cloud and spoke with him, and he took some of the power of the Spirit that was on him, Moses, and put it on the 70 elders. When the Spirit rested on them, they prophesied, but did not do so again. 29. But Moses replied, I wish that all of the Lord's people were prophets, and that the Lord would put his Spirit on them. That was Moses' wish, that everyone could experience the closeness, the realness, the communion with God that Moses felt. He says, I wish the Lord would put his Spirit on all of them. And Moses wasn't the only one with this wish. We see this wish with other prophets. Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Joel all share this sentiment. And throughout these examples in the Old Testament, the work of the Holy Spirit, listen, was completely confined to the nation of Israel. I just want you to think about that. All those examples were prophets of Israel. That only the chosen people of God could be blessed by the Holy Spirit. And only the select few, the Israelites, could experience the blessings of the Holy Spirit. This Old Testament law, this old covenant, the Spirit was hyper-focused on the Israelites. And that's certainly not me, and that's probably not you. And with the series on the Holy Spirit and Pentecost coming, Ascension Sunday is a few days away. Some of you may see where we're going with this. Completely confined to the nation of Israel wasn't really what Jesus had in mind, was it? He says this in Matthew 5. Do not think that I've come to abolish the law or the prophets. I've not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. And later, Matthew 28, verses 18 through 19, it says this. Then Jesus came to them and said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of who? Of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. And in the life of Jesus, we see the old covenant pass away in the ushering in of this new covenant of all nations, right? In the life of Jesus, we see the new covenant power of the Holy Spirit at work. In the life of Jesus, students, we see the fulfillment of the Old Testament covenant and the full embodiment of the Spirit. kind of like when a movie is released in theaters. If the Old Testament is like this sneak peek trailer of what the Spirit can do and wants to do and will do, then the life of Jesus is the full movie released for us to watch and see. And the analogy isn't finished there yet. Just stick with me. And what we read in Acts 2 at Pentecost is the transition between the old covenant Spirit work, really confined to the chosen people of God, to the New Testament covenant of Spirit work. This beautiful transition and effects it has on the followers of Jesus at that specific time is what we celebrate. It's what we recognize. It's what the Old Testament prophets longed for so many years ago. That we have the privilege to experience the Holy Spirit. That we have the privilege to be filled with the Holy Spirit. That we have the privilege to be empowered by the Holy Spirit. Today we worship a God who is readily available for all, no matter race or social status. And his Spirit is not confined to only Israel or only his select chosen people, but his Spirit went out to Jerusalem and Samaria and to all the ends of the earth, to me and to you. We acknowledge the life of Christ and the ultimate example he gave in living in step with the Holy Spirit. That is what we are to be full of. That is this gratefulness that we feel, this joy, this Spirit, students. So as we continue over these next few devotions to examine the Holy Spirit, leading up to Ascension Sunday on May 31st, may we be mindful of the role Acts 2 plays in our faith. This benchmark of transition between the old covenant work of the Holy Spirit and the release of the New Testament covenant Spirit work into all of the believers' lives and hearts. The transition that took place that very day, and the disciples couldn't contain themselves. The transition from the Old Testament covenant law to the new covenant prophesied by Jesus. On this Sunday, May 31st, 39 days after Easter, the 40th day of Easter, that the Holy Spirit begins to move through God's people with new covenant power. We recognize that on this Sunday. And I can't wait for us to explore more deeply what that means for us in our everyday life. Couple final reminders. The Holy Spirit is in us. That's our big idea. The Holy Spirit is in us. And the main idea for this devotion is that the Holy Spirit is in the Old Testament. Grace and peace to you all. I pray that this series really speaks to you and draws you closer to Christ. Talk to you soon.